Okay, hello, welcome to the channel. My name is Victor, and I'm going to be your anchor on this training. So this is actually a lab, and it's more of a research lab for the Cisco Ethical Hacker course. So if you're new to the channel, don't forget to subscribe and comment if you have questions on the ongoing training. So what we're going to be doing is that we're going to go through this particular lab. It's about creating a pen testing agreement. Now, if you've checked the series, we've looked at all the modules. We've also started looking at some of the labs for each of the modules. Now, this is lab 2.210, right? Lab 2.210, and it's about creating a pen testing agreement. And we've said that a pen test is a simulation of an attack to see if the vulnerabilities found out at the vulnerability stage, they are actually valid or not valid. And that particular simulation is actually documented. And the reason is that so that we can actually patch, is that we can actually tell how to better secure that particular IT infrastructure. Now, in creating a pen testing agreement, there are a few things you need to understand. So let's lay some background, some scenarios. Now, a pen testing agreement is a legally binding contract between a client and a customer. Now, I've always said that a pen testing engagement is a project. It's always going to have a start date, it's going to have an end date. It's meant to deliver a particular result. And there are certain terms and conditions that the pen test has to deliver. If it doesn't deliver that, then you have issues with regards to KPIs not met and all of that. So it's going to have things like date of commencement, scope of work, service level agreement, potential pen testing completion date, like an estimate. Now, some other terms like pricing details and all of that can also be in the document, because there is need for proper scope, because if that scope is not penned down, we might run into issues later on. Now, for this particular lab, you just need your PC internet to be able to complete to get to understand what a pen testing agreement looks like, because this agreement is actually your license to hack, is your license to like simulate such kind of attack. Now, the idea here is to use your favorite, that's instruction part one, use your favorite strategy and conduct a pen testing contract statement of work or an agreement. I've done that for you. I've gotten some list of sample. Now, the normal process when you want to learn how to draft any document, especially when it comes to technical documentations, and as it regards either a policy, a guideline, a documentation you need to do, is to first do an audit. So an audit is going to tell you what and what you need to protect, what and what you need to pen test. Then the next thing is to learn from standard guidelines. Standard guidelines being what are other people in the industry doing with regards to a pen testing agreement. Yours shouldn't be so far, shouldn't be so different, but from your security audit, you should adapt whatever you found out to the infrastructure you're actually pen testing, right? So if your client has, let's say, some digital assets in the cloud, some things physically, maybe they have a data center, or they just have a server room, or they have, let's say, a mobile app. So that's only going to be the coverage of what you're going to pen test. So it's going to be different from another client that have quite a whole lot of digital assets covering different niches and different sectors. So you could use a favorite search engine and just conduct, say, pen testing contracts, file type, PDF. Pen testing statement of work, file type, colon, PDF. So once you do that kind of search, you're going to see what like a standard, like a document that has to do with a pen testing agreement can look like. Now, develop a pen testing agreement. So the process is, like I said, do a security audit, learn from standard guidelines, now draft and adapt based on the security audit you've done. Then you have to now liaise with the client. A client will have to agree with whatever agreement you are bringing to the table. You don't just write an agreement and you send to the client for the client to sign. There must be input either from the legal, from the HR, from the CTO, from who have the final say or who is responsible for such kind of test within that particular enterprise. So they must sign off then before you cannot have a final draft, or you're going to have a final document. Now, one thing you should understand is that they will need to be parties to the agreement. So parties to the agreement is going to contain information like the name, the address, and the contact information of the client company, right? And of course, the pen testing company. So we're going to see some samples where you're going to say it's going to be an agreement between this, that is you, and of course, the company you're trying to do pen testing for. Now, scope of work. So every pen testing agreement should have a scope of work. So what's the scope of work? A scope of work is typically what are the details of what we want to do, right? So this section is going to list pen testers' responsibilities and obligations. So this is where we carve out our KPIs from. So this is where the part of the document we look at while we are conducting a test, so that we make sure that we've covered all the areas. This is still part of the document that we look at when we see that our client is getting into a scope creep. Scope creep, I mean, when the client is asking or demanding far more than what was documented or what was agreed. Because if we don't agree on it, if we don't sign off on it, then it's not binding, it doesn't hold. So you need to understand that having a document like this frees you from quite a lot of stress. You see a client is saying, okay, we want to do pen testing for a particular reason. We need to test our network and our website. Now, midway the pen testing engagement, or it can even be a vulnerability assessment project, and the client is now wanting to not just test the network and the website. They have two other websites they want to test. They have a mobile app they want to test. They have some handheld devices held by some staffs, or rather some staff spread across different parts of maybe the city or whatever. And you're meant to also test for vulnerability and maybe conduct some testing on that. You see, now your scope of engagement have actually gone beyond the initial thoughts you had. So if you don't document it, if you don't write your scope of work, then you are in for a big soup. This section lists the pen tester's responsibility obligation. This will include things like what tests to be performed, what actions should be taken if the vulnerabilities are found. Now, in some cases, you're going to find out that a client might just want you to test, do vulnerability assessment, do pen testing for me. That is a security audit, a vulnerability assessment, a pen testing. That's just one thing. Now, that is different from do a security audit, do a vulnerability assessment, do a pen testing, and also fix whatever issues that you find out. Now, that's a different ball game to get all together. So imagine the time is going to take, the finance is going to take, the team is going to take, is going to be way different. So you need to pen that, because the client might have an idea that, okay, maybe another company that did pen testing for them, maybe charged them a lump sum, let's say $5,000 to conduct an extensive vulnerability assessment pen test and also fix all patches and whatever and give advisory. Now, you might come in and you just have this kind of idea that, okay, I'm just going to do vulnerability assessment, I'm going to do pen testing, I'm not going to do any fix, I'm not going to do any patches, I'm not going to offer advisory. Mine is just to do the test, document it, tell what can be done or what should be done, and you pass it over as a report. Now, the client might be thinking, oh, you're going to go and let's say the budget, what was charged was like 40% or 50% of the $5,000 the client spent earlier on. Now, you see that you're going to be in a great mess because you didn't envisage in terms of the time. So you're going to be behind schedule, behind budget, even your team. So a lot of things are going to go messy if you don't properly document your scope of work. So what actions will be taken? So are you going to fix, or do you pass it on to the next team, or are you going to review? All of that should be documented. Now, the client agrees to, so this is now the client's responsibility. So you are also going to state what is the client's responsibility. For instance, a client can engage you and tell you, okay, please, I have a website, I have a network, I have a cloud application, I have a mobile app we're creating, we created this particular API. Can you do testing for us? Right? Now, the client is meant to provide quite a lot for you, depending on what kind of test. Normally, what we're going to do, we're going to send out a sheet, a document that spells out what task the client intends us to carry out. Then with that document, we cannot provide a quote with that code being agreed on, we cannot provide an agreement. After the agreement, we cannot provide a detailed, more detailed documentation, then we cannot kickstart. Now, the client might not understand that he or she needs to provide things like making sure that they backed up critical data. If that backup of all of those critical data is part of your own responsibility, then it's going to add up to the time you're going to spend. It's also going to add up to the cost. If they have an internal team that is going to do all of those backup, do all of those preparatory readiness, brief the internal team, make sure that they've isolated some systems or some items on all of those kind of things, getting ready for you to come in to do your work. If they have an internal team, either you're going to brief or that have done this kind of thing in the time past, it makes the work a whole lot easier. Things like providing consent documents for you, providing accommodation for you. Take, for instance, if you're going to do a test away from your city, it's going to cost you flights, it's going to cost you accommodation. If you're going to be going with a team of 2, 3, 4 persons, somebody's going to be documenting, somebody's going to be taking screenshots, somebody's going to be doing the active testing, somebody's going to be checking to make sure that there are no issues. It's most of the times a teamwork, 1, 2, 3%. So the client always have some sort of responsibility. Then another thing you want to have in your agreement is timeline, at least a modest estimate of timeline. So that gives you quite a lot of leverage, because if you don't have an estimated timeline, what it means is that you're going to be here and there. So you want to have project milestone, deadlines, you want to have what you're going to be doing, or what time estimate you're going to have for planning stage, for execution stage, for monitoring and control and analysis, then of course, and for your presentation stage. Now, of course, fees, billing, payment details. How are you going to be paid? Are you going to be paying upfront? Are you going to be paying 50%, 30%, 20%? Are you going to be paid 30%, sorry, 70%, 30%? How are you going to be paid? Lump sum, instrumental. Are they going to provide some equipment for you? All of those details, you should have them properly spelled out. Now, if something goes wrong, how do you terminate? Who can terminate? At what point in time can they terminate? What leads to termination of the contract? Is it that one party is not meeting to the agreement? So all of those things, you need to spell them out. Now, additional agreement section. So you can have warranty, disclaimer, dispute resolution. If something goes wrong, let's say peradventure, some things were not taken account into and the entire system shuts down, they start losing clients, anything can go wrong. So how do you resolve such? Do you use alternative dispute resolution? Is the court of law? What's the jurisdiction of the court of law? So that you're not taken to a court of law 10 cities away from your city. So you need to spell out most of those things in your agreement. So let me show you some samples of a pen testing agreement. Look at this one you have here. What's a pen testing contract? So it will have scope of work, agreement, payment terms, confidentiality agreement, key deliverables, completion dates, legal requirements, and completion dates can be estimates, right? It can be between so and time, and you want to work hard towards making sure that you made such kind of agreement. Now, this is what a sample looks like. Duty report of your team's finding, recommendations, best practices, and resources. Most of the times, I will always advise clients what might be your best bet in some certain scenarios. So that's one thing. You don't just test and go away. You test and you advise. It's part of what you should do with respect to your pen testing. Now, okay, look at this one here. So you have a pen testing agreement between this company, like I said, and the other company, your address, and as the service provider, and the other company, the address referred to as the client. So scope. So if it's a financial institution, they might be testing for GDPR, for PCI DSS. If it's for a health organization, they can be testing for EHR, HIPAA, different type of compliance. If it's for an e-commerce business, they can also be testing for web application, payment gateways, consumer data protection, API security. They can be testing for several things. That's why scope is so critical, right? Your pen testing cannot just be open-ended. Now, for instance, for web, for network, you have several frameworks in respect to pen testing. So you have those guidelines they spell out several things in several categories. So how do you know when you are done? So the only way you can know when you are done is if you've spelled out what constitutes being done, right? So duration and schedule, see a commencement date, a completion date, right? So when should it be that there was time we're trying to do a pen test, we had to ask the organization, so when is your off peak? When is your peak period? Is it going to be on weekends? So you want to make sure that you have minimal disruption. Now you have this SLA, you have authorization, you have a confidentiality clause. Then of course, legal compliance cost is very, very important. Liability termination, dispute resolution, governing law. So where should you be tried or where should you resolve these issues if they come up? And of course, signatures. I think you have some additional sample I've gotten. Like I said, just say a pen testing agreement or pen testing scope of work, file type, PDF. Separate them by space, and you're going to get quite a lot of samples. Okay, so that's all for this particular lab. So if you have questions, you go ask in the comment section, or if you're taking this training as part of our internship program, or our closed circle training programs, you could inbox in the training section group and you will get an answer.